In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
It is 100% real. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
All right, Simon, we are rocking and rolling. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. I've been looking forward to this. I know we've had to reschedule a couple times to make this happen, but this is going to be a fascinating conversation. I've met a few people in this space that are familiar with the kind of work that you do, and I've become more and more interested in that because I think it holds it holds an important space in this conversation. And what I'd like to do is give you an introduction so that everybody knows who you are, and then we can get right into some of the questions, for which I have a lot of. But okay, Simon Bown is our guest today. Simon is the host of two influential podcasts, a clinical hypnotherapist and an author specializing in topics related to consciousness, reincarnation, and the afterlife. He has produced over 800 podcast episodes, engaging with leading experts and scholars in the fields of near-death experiences, reincarnation, and contact with intelligent extraterrestrials. His podcasts, Alien UFO Podcast and our Paranormal Afterlife, have collectively garnered over 6 million downloads, with our Paranormal Afterlife reaching #1 on the UK Apple Podcast spirituality chart. Simon holds a diploma in clinical hypnotherapy and is certified in past life regression therapy. He has conducted hundreds of past life regression sessions, specializing in guiding individuals through these therapeutic processes. His research is informed by personal experiences with paranormal phenomena, including psychic flashes, UFO sightings, and other unexplained occurrences. These experiences have contributed to his academic interest in the nature of consciousness and its potential existence beyond the physical body. In addition to his work in podcasting and hypnotherapy, Simon is an avid bass guitarist and science fiction writer. Whew, anything I left out there, Simon?
No, not really. Only that I got sign up behind me says 5 million downloads when it's actually 6 now. I'll have to get a new sign.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's a lot of podcasts you've done, 800. How long have you been podcasting about these topics? When did you start that?
2018, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a slow start, but I'd always been listening to podcasts on these subjects. And being a musician and being creative, I started thinking maybe I could do this because I got the microphone, I got the recording software, I know how to use the recording software, and I thought, how hard can it be? But it's harder than I thought it was going to be.
It is harder than probably most people think. There's a lot that goes into it. But one of the things I've been wanting to ask you is, because you've created a lot of content and you've done a lot of work, but what inspired you to become a past life regressionist? How did you discover this field? Can you give me the origin story here?
I used to go to a place in London. This is the late 80s, and it's called the College of Psychic Studies. And that was the base of the Society for Psychical Research. And they were formed in the late Victorian era. And so they had a fantastic library at that college. But I wasn't a student there. There were people, you could go there and get training in mediumship and psychic stuff and past life regression and channeling and all these different things. And so you could go there and just pay a small amount of money, and the students could practice on you, their mediumship or whatever. And then you could pay a lot more money and one of the teachers would do their thing. But so I went there, and I was maybe every couple of weeks, all these different mediums and things. And it was like an investigation. It's not like I was trying to contact somebody who died or get proof of the afterlife in that way. It was a fascination that I've always had. I remember 10 years old, I used to take books out of the local public library about Bigfoot and ghosts and UFOs and things.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank you all for tuning in. If you're enjoying this episode and want to help us uncover more mysteries of the universe, don't forget to support Curious Dimension. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the like button. It really helps get this content in front of more people who are curious just like you. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to click that notification bell too, so you're the first to know when we release new content. For those of you listening on your favorite podcast platform, make sure to follow or subscribe to the show and leave us a rating and a review. It helps more than you know. And whether you're watching or listening, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below or send me a message. Thanks for being part of the Curious Dimension community. Your support keeps this journey going.
So I went in there and I booked a past life regression, and it was just amazing. And one of the things about it is that if you go and see a medium, they can do a thing called a past life reading. Basically, you're sitting there and they give you the information, but with a past life regression, you're experiencing it. And so what happened was I was lying back on this sort of bed, and this lady took me into the hypnosis, and I went straight in there, and we went to this past life where I saw myself as a small girl in a park. And it was a very distinctive park on a steep slope. And I saw my mother and father there, and a baby, and there was a dog running around, and I could almost feel the grass between my toes. And I remember just slightly opening my eyes and looking down, and it's almost like I could see little feet where my knees are. So it was quite intense, and I was really quite into it. And I've found out over time that I'm a very good candidate for hypnosis. But it was also quite emotional. And then with that, she was saying, okay, we saw all this stuff in the park. She said something like, just allow yourself to move to the next memory. What's the next thing that comes to you? And then I was a nurse in the First World War, and I was in France, maybe a mile or two back from the front line, because there was all these men coming in with these terrible injuries, with like their legs blown off and all sorts of things. And we were in these huge canvas tents where there were a few beds there, and we had to look after all these men. So that was very hectic and emotional. And it was such a session that was so amazing for me to see all this past life stuff that I decided I wanted to do it again and again. And I did. So I've seen maybe 10 or 12 of my past lives over the years. And so eventually it just became a thing as, yeah, I want to do this. But I went and got a diploma in clinical hypnotherapy, which is that helping people lose weight and stop smoking and all these things. And it was a 10-month course because I wanted to learn hypnotherapy properly and really know what I was doing. And then afterwards, I went on to do the certificate in past life regression therapy.
And so when you said that you found out that you were maybe predisposed for hypnosis, is there something that they've genetically markered? Is there something in the brain, or does it have to do with the person's demeanor and psychology? What allows one person to be more subjective to hypnosis rather than someone else?
I'd say it's down to the person on the day. There are, I wouldn't say there are not people who can't be hypnotized. There's a small number of people, but I've done sessions with people, and they've gone into quite a light hypnotic state, and we've seen little glimpses of past lives. And then we do it again a week later, and they go right deep into the hypnosis and get really into a past life. So it's almost like it depends on the day, how you feel, how open-minded you are, and how happy you are to accept what's coming to you, and how happy you are to follow the hypnotherapist. I think for some people, if you go and see a hypnotherapist, and say you're a woman and you're going into a room with this man who's the hypnotherapist, and he closes the door, it's just strange space, and he says, close your eyes, I'm going to hypnotize you. That's not the most relaxing sort of scenario, is it? But
No.
when I do my past life regressions, I do them all on Zoom. So I've got clients all over the world. And I think that's a more safe space as well for many people, if you can just switch off the Zoom and that's the end of it. And you're in your own home and you're alone. Yeah, so the thing about hypnosis is when you're hypnotized, you're still completely aware of your surroundings, and you feel like you could stop anytime you want, and you remember everything. It's just being very relaxed. And I found that I only realized just how relaxed I was when I come out of the hypnosis, and you sit up and you think, oh boy, I'm wiped out. And also time perception changes. You come out of a session that's maybe an hour long and it feels like it was just 10 minutes.
Is it the
So
kind of thing where you're aware of what's going on, but your left brain goes on autopilot and you're allowing your right brain to explore a little bit? Is this kind of what's going on, or what's happening? I guess what I'm asking is, do they know what's going on inside the brain? I'm sure they've done EEG work and other brainwave activity. Can you tell me what's happening in the brain when this is going on?
your brain waves change, and you have alpha and beta and delta, and your brain waves change to the way they go when you're falling asleep. When you're in that state where you're in between being awake and you're
Like the
asleep, you're very,
hypnagogic
very
state?
relaxed. Yeah, something like that. And that's how relaxed you are when you're in bed and you're really comfortable and you're just falling asleep and your brain goes into that. That's what it's like being in hypnosis. But
Mhm.
I was told at college was that there's never been a brain state found that they could point to and say, ah, that's it, that's hypnosis. It's like
Mm.
you say, they've done all the EEG tests and analyzed people and watched brain activity, but they've never found something scientifically that they could point to that's hypnosis.
Mm. Can you share maybe a significant moment you had with a client where they had a profound impact on the work you were doing at that time?
Yeah, there's a few things. I had a lady who was a client, and she didn't tell me this before the
Mhm.
session. We were doing something therapeutic, and saw herself as a man in a past life in a forest, and they were hunting, and they stepped in a bear trap, and those big claws came up and grabbed their leg. But what she told me after the hypnosis is that's where she has eczema on her leg. And she's in her 50s. She's had it her whole life and tried everything to get rid of it. And it
Mm.
was just about 4 or 5 weeks later, she emailed me and said, it's completely gone. There's something happened with that past life regression that affected that. And I've had other people tell me similar things with a pain in the stomach or a pain in their arm or something that kind of links back to a past life injury.
And I've heard this before. I've read, I think it was Before by Jim Tucker. And in his book, I'm sure you're fully aware of his work, Dr. Ian Stevenson's work over there at the University of Virginia on past lives with children. But that's one thing they point to is birthmarks or birth defects on someone that has a past life regression and they remember an injury. Maybe it's a bullet wound and they have a mole there, a birth defect somewhere for where the injury that caused the previous life to end abruptly will sometimes manifest in a physical form on the body, the present form. So I'm sure you've heard of this. So you've seen some of that in your work, correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I've seen people with birthmarks and we've spotted that exactly that kind of way. I had a guy who had terrible stomach pains and he had all the tests done and the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. And we went to a past life where he was stabbed in the stomach in exactly that spot. And we saw that past life and that seemed to resolve quite quickly in the session. And we moved on to another past life. And in that one, something had happened where he was really guilty. And I asked him, where does this manifest in your body? And he says, it's in my stomach. So I've got techniques to break the bond with the past life or release negative energy. So we went through that and then we did another session. And he told me at the beginning of the next one that the pain had gone by 50%. And he said he sits in front of the TV poking himself in the belly because he can't believe how the pain has decreased so much.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I have a friend that does similar work to this, and she wants to come on and do an interview as well. But her opinion is I should go and experience this for myself first. So I'm probably going to have some sort of therapy session where they try to induce this state so that I can understand it more. But this sounds absolutely fascinating. And let's go on to another question here. So what do you say to the skeptics who doubt the validity of past life memories? Is there any way to prove it using words, or is this something you have to experience?
Yeah, I think you can use words for it. It's when there's verifications. Like when I said I was in that past life regression and I saw a park that was on a really steep slope. And it's really unusual for a park to be like that. the town planners were looking at an area, they wouldn't point there and say, well, let's put the park here because it's so bad. And a couple of years after I did the session, I found that park. I'd never been to this part of London before, and it was exactly like I saw it in my regression. And it's so distinctive, and the buildings around it, the houses, were just like the ones I'd seen in my past life regression. But I had a guy on my podcast, Robert Snow, who was a homicide detective, 38 years, and he did a past life regression. He was like a tough guy. He's a homicide detective, and he'd be at work, and there was a woman there who was trying to get him to do a past life regression, and he didn't want to do it. And he said it got silly. He'd be walking down the corridor and see her coming, and he'd dive into an office to avoid her. Eventually, he gave in. He said, all right, I'll do it. I'll prove it's rubbish, and that'll be the end of it. And he went straight into a past life, and he saw all these different things. And afterwards, he said he worked out 28 proofs of that past life. Now, this was in the 90s. It was before the internet. So as a detective, he had to use his skills to do research and try and find it. And he saw himself as an artist about the year 1900. And this artist wasn't famous because he thought, maybe I've seen these pictures in a museum, or I've seen something on TV about him. And he just could not find this artist. And in the end, he was on holiday in New Orleans, and they went into this little art gallery. And he went upstairs where the crappy paintings were, so to speak. And there was this painting exactly as he'd seen it in his past life regression. Because in the past life regression, he'd seen himself painting it. And so that was the first link. And he found out from the shop owners who had painted it. And he was able to find the person and see all these things from that person's life that he saw in the regression, things he couldn't possibly have known. And they were really detailed. It wasn't just some general sort of thing there. So that's interesting. He's written a book about that. But also I had a client who emailed me and said they found their own past life. And he sent me a portrait, an oil painting of that person. And so it does happen that for that side of it, past life regression, people do find these past lives.
Does everybody have them?
Everybody have past lives.
Yes. Or are there cases where things get a little weird and maybe they're not necessarily on this planet? If you extrapolate this out and we think there's life somewhere else, does life go from planet to planet spiritually?
Yeah, that's what I found. I had not many clients who have gone to past lives on other planets. And it's something where we get to this point in the session where we're going to enter a past life. I don't tell them where they're going to go or what the past life's going to be. One of my techniques is we get to this point where they're in a garden and there's this big tall wall and a big gate in the middle of this wall. And I say to them, on the other side of this gate is one of your past lives. So now just open the gate and step through. And then I say, well, where are you? So the past life comes to them. Then I don't tell them anything about what they're seeing or feeling. I just got to use open, basic questions and guide them through it. I can't suggest anything.
Yeah, because it won't work. I imagine that's one of the things that skeptics would point to is hypnotic suggestion. But obviously that's a big no in what you do because you're coloring the outcome. When you've had some of these stranger regressions where they're not exactly here on Earth, is this the client kind of confirming this? They're saying something's very different here. And so it's all the client basically confirming from themselves. You're not telling anybody what they're seeing. They're going through it.
Right.
Can you tell me, what does that feel like when you're there? Is it a knowing? Do you have senses like smells, tastes? Like what sort of things come through when you're doing this? Is it like a dream? Can you give me some pieces of that?
Yeah, it comes to you in your mind's eye, in your imagination. And when you first start a session, you can feel that you're just making it up because that's what we do with our imagination. But as the session goes on, it becomes more and more obvious you're not making it up because the lives can be so unexpected and unpredictable. If you go into the past life where you're the other gender, you probably wouldn't make that up, expect to see that. And it's like when I finished a regression where I saw myself as a woman in Venice in the 17th century. Afterwards, the regressionist said to me, "Would you make that up for yourself?" And I was like, "No, I'd be a Spitfire pilot in the Second World War," something like that. But it's things like I said earlier, there was a slight feeling of grass between my toes. There was a feeling of wearing clothes centuries ago that felt very tight around my abdomen, and I could almost feel that. And I haven't had smells. It's mostly visual stuff and knowledge. Like when I was in that park and I saw my parents there, I saw the father of that life, and I knew that I know that person in this life. They've incarnated with me again. And you have that sort of knowledge that you can spark.
Mhm. And when you're seeing yourself, so sometimes in dreams, it's almost like you're watching like a video and like you have a different perspective and you're looking at the sort of scene happen. Are you getting that? Or is it a first person image where you are in that moment? Like you can see your hands like this. Like, what is that experience like? Has it been both?
Yeah. Yeah. I find it jumps depending on what you're going to see. The idea is that your spirit guides choose which past life, and they'll choose something that's good for you to see, something that's going to help you. And it may be that they're almost like the director or the camera operator, and they choose which angle you're going to see it from, whether it's from yourself or whether you're watching what's happening. And I've had that kind of thing for me, jumping backwards and forwards.
Interesting. Some of these other paranormal experiences you're having along with this, we mentioned psychic flashes, UFO sightings, other unexplained occurrences. What are you having some of these during the sessions?
No, they're things that have happened other times, other places.
Okay. Can we go into some of that? Would you
Yeah.
mind touching on some of these other experiences that you had? And do you think that predisposed you to get interested in this work?
Yeah, it's interesting you say it like that. I wonder if the people, or maybe everybody, is on a spiritual path, and that you're
Mm.
given nudges along the way in different ways. And it may be that I saw these UFOs 2 times. I've seen UFO, and I wonder if they were showing themselves to me on purpose to give me another step forward on my spiritual path. Thing with getting the psychic flashes or having other things happen. So it's like with the first UFO I saw, I'd been out of London to the west of London playing a blues gig on a Sunday night. And after the gig, we all packed up. This is the early 90s. And I was in the car driving back to London on the motorway. And we drive on the left hand side. And it was a place where there's no street lights. And it was dark. And I could see in front of me and behind me, there was no other cars. And I traveled this part of the motorway a lot. I knew where I was. And as I'm driving, I could see this light off to the left, a really bright light and a field. And I thought, that's odd. There's no buildings there. I thought maybe it was emergency repairs for water main or electricity or something. And I couldn't quite see what it was because there was a flyover over the motorway and I couldn't see what was the other side of it. So I slowed down and I came through, and then up in the air was a craft. And it's a thing, I say it's unidentified. I don't know if it was alien or something, but it was shaped like a rugby ball and about the size of a big house, completely silent, didn't move an inch the whole time I saw it, had many red pin spot lights on one half of the bottom, and a really bright beam of light coming out of it, pointed at the ground, coming out the other end of it. So I'm dropped my speed on my car to 3 or 4 or 5 miles an hour. I'm leaning forward over the steering wheel, staring up at it. So I must have got a good look at it for 20 or 30 seconds. And you do a kind of mental checklist. You think, well, it's not a helicopter because it's so close to me. It's 200 feet away and maybe just 25 feet off the ground. And it's big, it's right there. And a helicopter would make so much noise if you were that close. And it couldn't be an aircraft because they can't stay in the air when they're stationary. It wasn't a hot air balloon. I couldn't work out what it was. And then I moved forward and it was behind me, and I just carried on driving and went home, which for me seems a bit odd because I'm so interested in it. Why didn't I stop? I could have pulled over. But I've talked to people who've UFO sightings and experiences, and this is a thing that sometimes shows up. It's almost like your mind is switched off in some way of having thoughts. Some people will see a UFO and they'll have their phone and they just won't think of taking a picture of it.
Yeah, that seems to happen all the time.
Yeah. So I wondered if that was part of my path. And it's like the other time I saw a UFO, that was weird. And with the psychic flashes, I was going to go to a friend's wedding in New Zealand. I've never been to New Zealand before. And they said to me, can you get me some piece of tourist tat from London to take to them? And I got them a tea towel with the London Underground map on it. And so there I was in the center of London with just coming out of a shop. And for 30 seconds, I had a vision of being in New Zealand. And I was sitting in the car next to my friend. They were driving. They had this little red car. I saw the suburbs of Christchurch, the road names. We were having this conversation. And then it's about 2 weeks later, I was in New Zealand and it happened exactly as I'd seen it when I was in London, that 30 seconds of time. It wasn't a deja vu because they're quick flashes, aren't they? The sudden weird feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But that was 30 seconds and the houses were exactly right. And they have to build them a certain way because there's earthquakes and they can't just build normally. They're wooden and they're all painted pastel colors. And the road names I wouldn't have known. That was some weird psychic flash, one of the ones I've had. And I'll tell you one more kind of paranormal thing. I recorded an episode with somebody who'd written a book about kind of spiritual gifts and angels and things, which I didn't really consider before because I'm not religious. I didn't grow up in a religious family, and angels, that was a Christian thing. I didn't really know about it. But she was saying, you'll know when there's an angel about because they leave feathers. And so I'm like, okay. And the next day I'm walking down the street and this white feather falls out of the sky right in front of me. It reminded me of what she said. And I thought, yeah, okay. It could have just fallen down. And about a month later, I'm talking to somebody else, a medium that I'm interviewing for the podcast. Mm-hmm. And we finished the recording and we're talking. And she's a friend of the first person that I've been talking to. And I said, hey, there was this thing with angels and flat feathers, and this feather came out of the sky. And the medium saying, yeah, definitely feathers are a thing with angels. So I finished the call and I went to see my teenage daughter in her bedroom, and she's very neat and tidy. And I go to her bedroom and there's a feather about this long in the middle of her floor. And I say to her, well, what's this feather? Where did it come from? And she's on her laptop and she looks around and she's like, oh, I don't know. And just go back to what she's doing. So that was weird. And then maybe 6 weeks later, I go and see a medium myself, and I'm sitting opposite them. They're in this big chair. And she does the whole hour session, and she was really good. And I'm talking to her afterwards about this thing with angels and feathers. And she says, look at the floor. And I look down, there's a feather on the floor in between us. And this whole session, this is an open floor, very clean. That feather was not there for the whole hour we were talking. Neither of us got up and did anything. Where did that feather come from? And it's that coincidence of we were talking about angels and feathers. It's not like we weren't even talking about that subject. And so that was a point where my brain stopped and I just could not compute. And I also wonder if the angels were watching me, sending me these signs, and they were thinking, man, what do we have to do to get through to this guy? And the third one worked.
And there's these stories of I think it's the Seraphim, where people will see things in the sky, almost like a craft, but looks like it has like angel wings attached to it. I think this has been well documented. And I believe even the new whistleblower that came out, Jake Barber, had an experience over his house. And he said he will see this thing over his house on occasion that has wings and it's like a blurry craft type of thing. And I think in biblical and ancient texts, it's known as the Seraphim. And so there's probably some sort of real phenomenon associated with that. And then some people get little nudges, like you said, here, look at this. And it's always very personal to that person, like a synchronicity. It's always very personal to these people that have these sort of moments that are extremely significant to them. And then it'll pop up over a relatively short period of time to keep it in the front of their mind. But I think it's real. I think like you said, these are little nudges to get our attention. And the more I study these topics, like the crop circle phenomena, the UFO phenomenon, that's this little theme I see. It's getting our attention, nudging us forward, trying to tell us that maybe there's more going on behind the scenes than what we're really seeing. And I think the more people pay attention to it, the more it manifests itself. And I think this is playing a role in our increased awareness or consciousness, if you like, to get us going in a new direction and help us. I know that's a broad statement, but do you see that in your work, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, it does seem something like that. I was talking to Whitley Strieber a couple of days ago, and I recorded an episode with him, and he's got a new book called The Fourth Mind. And he said something like the ETs would do something that we can't tolerate as a way of pushing us forward. And it's
Mm,
this idea of alien abductions. And he said it's a weird idea that he said it's like if you have a dog that's naughty, you roll up a newspaper and you just bonk them on the nose. And you don't hit them really hard. You just give them a little tap just to show them that wasn't right. And he likened it to that and saying that they're trying to help us move on so we can regain the fourth mind, which it would be telepathic. And he said they think outside reality, these ETs, where we used to do it thousands of years ago, and they are outside the stream of time, which is where we used to be as well. So you start getting into all these really peculiar ideas, this high strangeness.
mhm,
And he told me a story of he would have these ETs come into his bedroom, and occasionally he'd be these ones he called the small blue guys. He said they were cobalt blue. They didn't look like the greys. And he had a couple of friends staying with them at their cabin in the woods. And these people had two sons, and one of their sons was off at summer camp. So they were sitting there talking, and the younger son came downstairs and said, "Hey, a little blue man just came into my bedroom. He says to tell you Timothy's going to be okay. Don't worry about him." And then it was just a few minutes later, they got a call saying Timothy's had a really bad accident. So that's a weird thing that it could have been these small cobalt sort of aliens, one of those blue guys, but that also suggests that alien has had contact with somebody telepathically
mm,
that's somewhere else, and they're doing a service by passing a message on.
mhm. Yeah, I often wonder, do you follow the disclosure movement, what's happening in the US with Congress and these hearings that have taken place?
Yeah, a little bit.
Obviously, that main narrative is that there's a nuts and bolts aspect to this, that they've recovered craft and, you know, sort of the narrative gets pushed is that it's from another planet. But I often wonder, because I've been digging into this more and more over the last few years, that maybe that's not the bigger secret. It's that it has more to do with us and our consciousness or spirituality or whatever it is. That is, that may actually be a very powerful thing that human beings have. And when a certain number of people get to this point where they're aware of that, there can be a loss of control. And I'm wondering if that's the bigger secret, because all of these topics have this underlying consciousness aspect to it, whether it's remote viewing, the crop circle phenomenon with all the synchronicities, the UFO phenomenon where people tend to be a little bit more psychic after they've had an encounter or something happens. It all goes back to this conversation of our minds and not thinking so linearly anymore. So I'm starting to get this idea that's a big secret that maybe they don't want to touch. Have you thought about that at all? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I've wondered about it. It's weird that there'd be so much that seems in a way spiritual and consciousness based and interdimensional with ETs, but at the same time they've got metallic craft that
Hmm.
occasionally crash, supposedly.
Hmm.
I've talked to a guy the other day. again on my podcast, Michael Schratt, who's got all these.
I've talked to Michael before. I've had him on the podcast.
Yeah, so he seems to know about all these different crashes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird how the visitors, as Whitley calls them, may be using a certain program, a technique to communicate with humans, and they're doing it in certain ways, and maybe they had to start off doing it physically like that, but it's become more and more conscious based as time goes on. But of course, there may be lots of aliens out there. It could be like the human race. You say, what's the human's agenda? It depends on whether you ask Russia or the United States or North Korea or Australia. Everybody's got different agendas. And it's so hard to know because you get into alien abduction, which is what I'm particularly interested in. There's all this stuff with high strangeness that turns up where it gets really weird. And with the disclosure, I've wondered if maybe the ETs are in charge. Maybe they've told the government or the military, don't you dare tell anyone about us. Or maybe there's a program that ETs are doing that they've done before on other planets, and their timeline is 500 years. So they've only been doing it here 70, 80 years.
Yeah, it is interesting when you go down that route of maybe disclosures in the hands of not people. It's when you say that, it sounds so fantastical, but when you start to pull this apart and you see all the high strangeness associated with it and the nudging and the synchronicities, it becomes more digestible. Maybe not digestible, but more the lens starts to focus a little bit more. You can see how that could be actually happening. And then I often wonder if humans are like mound building termites, where we're doing things on autopilot. We have a little bit of free will, but then there's things that nudge us in very sophisticated ways that we might not be fully aware of. And then sometimes, like when we're daydreaming or we're thinking about something, we might be a little bit aware of our actions. And yeah, it wouldn't shock me if there was an unseen force that's nudging disclosure and like having this little dance back and forth to slowly acclimate people for a reason that has to do with our own awareness and consciousness. And if you go too fast, too quick, maybe there's problems that arise. And so it has to be like this slow drip thing so that something bad doesn't come through. I don't know. These are just thoughts I've had, or I'm wondering if people that are in control of disclosure at least think this way. So I'm not sure.
No, I'm not sure. I know there's something to do with reincarnation that makes me wonder about the world and about certain things with that. Is that the idea of reincarnation is we reincarnate to come back every time to learn a lesson, to learn something so that our soul can advance. So you might look at the earth and think there's always going to be suffering because there's always going to be souls who need to learn what that's and learn those lessons. So it might be that maybe if there was huge disclosure and there was some big shift that might make things better everywhere, that's not useful from a spiritual point of view.
Yeah, you're right. There may have to be these lessons that have to be learned. And a lot of people, that would make people very uncomfortable if they thought for a second these engineered conflicts around the world are almost like a necessary part of the progression of the soul. That's a very uncomfortable conversation to have with people, because then you're openly suggesting that people have to die and suffer in order for this whole sort of thing to move forward. People aren't going to like that. And so that might be one of the reasons why the conversation tries to be shut down over and over again about this, because it's not healthy, planetarily speaking and species speaking, for people to know that. If that is true, I don't know. We're in speculation land right now.
Yeah, because there's a human viewpoint and there's a soulful viewpoint. And you might have a life on earth that's a lot of suffering, it's very unhappy. And you think to yourself, if there's reincarnation, there's no way I'm coming back here. But then your soul will be looking at it thinking, man, this is great. I learned so much stuff. I'm definitely coming back here. And there's this thing where the idea is that your soul just puts a small percentage of itself in each life. And so you, as Matt, will if you die and your spirit goes on, it's not that Matt will reincarnate, it's that the soul that you're with or you're part of will put another part of itself in the next reincarnation. But because you're all one soul, it's all connected. And so I see it almost if you're a tree and a tree's got all these leaves. And so it's like a soul has all these past lives in the way a tree has all these leaves. A tree's experiencing all these leaves at the same time. And the soul is experiencing all of its lives at the same time. Because there's no time in the afterlife, it's eternal. And that's maybe why we can do past life regression and get to these other past lives and see them unfolding as though they were happening at the time.
Yeah, and it's interesting that some people seem to have a lot of recall with this. Where I've been told, or I've seen people that claim that they can see their past lives, or maybe they have a little bit more ability to do this. But maybe that's a functional part of a species going forward. Some people need to remember so that it reminds the rest of us that's what's going on, so that we don't get too wrapped up in our linear thinking. Obviously, those are important for survival. We need to have these mechanisms so that we can go on. But maybe the important thing is just to learn and grow. And so that whatever this energetic imprint we have, call it a soul, call it a spirit, whatever you want to call it, has the ability to learn something and then move forward. What it's moving forward to, I have no idea. But I've been alive for 46 years on this planet. And one of the only things I can figure out, that the point is just to learn and grow, be happy, and try to understand a little bit about what the heck's going on. So yeah, these are big topics. This is one of the things I love to get into on this podcast, is these bigger, broader topics of this. Can we talk a little bit more about past life regressions here? Why is it that, do you think, I don't imagine you've done a lot of past life regressions with children, but I'm sure you're aware that they seem to remember a little bit more. Why is that, do you think, that children remember them a little bit more? It's because they haven't been colored with life yet?
I don't know. It's interesting that children have verifiable past life memories. And I've wondered if it's a glitch, that it was an accident that shouldn't have come through. Or because I've had this idea my whole life that the spirit world, the afterlife, or heaven, whatever you want to call it, would be perfect and never make mistakes. But it seems like maybe there's a mistake here, or something's coming through that shouldn't. Like, why would they have a birthmark from a past life injury? Is that a glitch? Or is there something about consciousness that imprints on the physical body in the womb? That's a weird question.
Yeah, very weird. And I wonder if maybe the point is, maybe you're right. Maybe we're not supposed to remember any of this, so that you have this clean slate to have all of these different experiences. So you increase the potential for learning lessons. Because if when you remember everything, it's almost like you're cheating a little bit in this game to shape and grow and learn. But if you know everything, you can look out for pitfalls. And maybe that's not the point. Maybe you're supposed to have experiences with a clean slate so that you can make mistakes and learn from that and grow and achieve. It makes sense from a simulation standpoint. You would want it to be as clean as possible, right? If you're trying to learn in a simulated environment, you don't want the subject to know what you're trying to do. You want them to go out there so that you can collect that raw data as cleanly as possible. So maybe that's what's going on. I don't know.
And there's an intensity to it in your life that way. And maybe people might think this life's getting a bit of a pain in the ass. I'll tell you what, I'll end this one and then I'll start another one.
That is so wild. Simon, what else do you think we could talk about here during this podcast? We've touched on past life regressions, your hypnosis work, UFOs. Is there something else that you think we should be talking about in this conversation about this in your work?
Yeah. Coincidentally, I have my new book, Verified Near-Death Experiences, which is coming out in about a month. And with this, it's all about people who have a near-death experience and they have their out-of-body experience and they see things happening while they're dead, And then they talk to people afterwards and it's verified. And so that's the subject of this book. That's what it's all about. And so you have people who they're on the operating table and they've got the machinery hooked up. So they know their heart stopped beating, their brain is flatlined. And I talked to Dr. Eben Alexander, who was a professor of neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School. If anybody knows the brain, it's him. And he said, when your brain's flatlined, you cannot make and retain complex memories. It's just impossible. And yet that's what we see over and over with these verified near-death experiences. And I can give you a couple examples from the book. There was a woman who was undergoing this process to look at her spine. She had a spinal injury. And what they do is they put you on this bed that's got this X-ray thing, and they put some dye in your spine, just under your skull. And then as you're upright, the dye goes down through the spine and they can see if there's any leakage where the injury was. But the guy that was controlling the table, he was looking the other way at a monitor, pressed the wrong button and the table went backwards. So all the dye went into her brain and that caused her to die. So while she was dead, she was on the ceiling looking down and saw what everybody did, running around trying to resuscitate her. And when she woke up, like 20 minutes later, once she was settled, she talked to the medical staff saying, I saw you do this, you did that, then you made that phone call and you brought that bit of equipment in. And she recounted everything they did and said. And they knew that happened while she was dead. There's no way she could know about it and see it. But she said there was an orthopedic surgeon and a neurosurgeon, and the neurosurgeon stood next to her. And she said he clenched his fists and he clenched his teeth and he looked at her and said, I'm not going to stand here and listen to this anymore. And he stormed out of the room. But the orthopedic surgeon sat down with her and said, tell us again what happened. What did you see? And they all confirmed it. What's good about that case is that they knew for sure that she was dead when that happened, what she saw, because she was hooked up to the machines. It's not like it was, say, in the street, an accident, and they're doing CPR. They don't know if they're alive or dead. But with this, they knew for sure she was dead. And so there's 30 cases like that in my book.
Wow. We always hear these anecdotal stories of that, but to have confirmation from people that are in the room, that's a solid case that you would probably want to look at to say, hey, maybe there's something going on here. Maybe there's some sort of energetic imprint that leaves the actual physical body and can sometimes come back in if the body's healthy enough to regain consciousness and fire up all the systems again. This is absolutely amazing, Simon. Simon, this was awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tell people how they can find you, your website. You showed us the new book coming out. What else do you have going on?
The website is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. And on there is like link to my podcast and the book. And with the past life regression, I offer a free 20-minute consultation. So you can go on there and use Calendly and book a date and time that suits you. And then we'll just talk about past life regression for 20 minutes. If you're interested in doing it, maybe it's therapeutic. Some people just want to do it to see what happens. It's exploration. And my podcasts are Our Paranormal Afterlife. And most of them are 1-hour interviews, and same with Alien UFO podcasts. And there's, like you said, there's hundreds of episodes. And it's been a real education for me doing that. So yeah, the book's out late March.
Very good. And your interview with Whitley Strieber, is that one out as well? Or is that one coming out?
That's out next week.
That's out next week. Awesome. So everybody check that one out as well. Simon, this was so awesome. Thank you for joining us. I got to have you back on so we could talk a little bit more about this if you're open to that.
Yeah, definitely. I enjoy it.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. If you're finding any value, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps out the show.